Spring 1957, Western Alaska. 11 Caterpillar D8s are still out on the Kuskokwim when the river road begins to break beneath them. Shore leads are opening, pressure cracks are spreading, and on ice that no longer wants to carry steel, every hour left to move the machines is already disappearing. To understand why 11 Caterpillar D8s ended up trapped on a river that was turning against them, you have to go back to Western Alaska in the winter of 1957. The Kuskokwim was not just a river. In cold months, it became a road, a freight corridor, and in some districts the only practical way to move weight across country that had almost no permanent infrastructure at all. For villages, contractors, and state crews, frozen water was not a seasonal curiosity. It was part of the transportation system. That winter, a convoy of heavy crawler tractors was working the ice road system laid out across the Kuskokwim Basin. The machines were Caterpillar D8s, among the heaviest and most trusted dozers in American field service at the time. Depending on configuration, a 1950s D8 could weigh well over 30 tons, with the kind of low-speed pushing power that made it indispensable in rough country. On packed snow, on frozen gravel, and on solid river ice, it could move freight that lighter machines could not touch. But on a river in breakup season, weight became a liability measured in hours. The operation itself was rooted in Alaska's geography. Before all-weather roads reached much of the interior and southwest, winter haul routes were often cut across lakes, sloughs, and river channels because frozen surfaces offered the flattest line through otherwise punishing terrain. A machine that could not cross Muskeg in June might cross the same ground in February without difficulty. The Kuskokwim, stretching hundreds of miles through broad floodplain country, offered exactly that kind of temporary passage. Once the cold had built enough thickness, crews could mark a route, test weak sections, and move fuel, lumber, machinery, and camp supplies over ice that in summer would have been impassable to tracked freight. That system worked only as long as winter held. By March, every operator in Alaska understood the arithmetic. Snow cover insulated bad ice. Overflow hid weak spots. Warm winds could change a safe crossing in a day. Current under the sheet never stopped, and where the river narrowed, bent, or pressed around bars and cut banks, the underside of the ice could thin long before the surface showed any warning. On paper, the machines could still make the return run. On the river, the season was already beginning to close. The 11 D8s had been committed to work beyond the far side of the route, part of the heavy transport effort that depended on the Kuskokwim remaining stable long enough to bring them back. That decision made sense only if you understand the conditions on site. In remote Alaska, you did not casually leave that much iron idle. The Caterpillar D8 represented cost, freight difficulty, fuel burden, maintenance labor, and strategic value all at once. If the machines were already across and the road still seemed usable, the pressure was always to finish one more movement, one more tow, one more load cycle before shutdown. Mechanically, the D8 was built for exactly that kind of confidence. Caterpillar's post-war D8 line had earned a reputation in dam work, military engineering, logging, and frontier construction because it could absorb punishment that broke lighter tractors. Its diesel engine delivered steady torque at low speed. Its track footprint spread weight better than wheeled equipment ever could. Its final drives, undercarriage, and drawbar structure made it a machine for bad ground and harder decisions. Operators trusted it because most of the time that trust was justified. But river ice is not ground. It only imitates ground until it doesn't. Some of these tractors were likely running with freight sleds or support loads, which changed everything. A D8 by itself was heavy enough to add cargo, fuel, and the repeated stress of multiple crossings over the same route, and the road began to age under the machines using it. Each pass mattered. Each warm day mattered more. When a haul road exists on top of moving water, strength is never uniform. One section can carry a dozer train without complaint, while another, only a few hundred yards away, is already turning hollow underneath. The crews were not ignorant of that risk. Alaska ice road work in the 1950s was built on constant reading of surface clues. Men watched for seepage at cracks, a dull change in color, sagging around pressure ridges, and the sound a machine made when the sheet beneath it stopped behaving like rigid support. They knew to space loads. They knew to avoid bunching heavy tractors in one reach. They knew that a route safe at dawn could become dangerous by late afternoon if temperatures climbed and the river began moving under the skin. The problem was that knowledge did not stop breakup, it only let you recognize it earlier. An early breakup was the one variable no crew could control. In 1957, the Kuskokwim began to open before the heavy equipment movement was finished. That was the turning point. Not a dramatic explosion of ice all at once, but a sequence of changes that made the route less trustworthy with each day. Margins softened first. Approaches that had been hard frozen started to rot. Then channels opened where current ran strongest. Cracks widened. Water appeared where there had been only snow. The river entered the crisis long before the crisis became visible to anyone looking from shore. Now the operation changed. The question was no longer how much more freight the ice road could carry. The question was whether 11 Caterpillar D8s could be brought back before the Kuskokwim cut the route behind them. That is what made the situation so dangerous. These were not trucks that could accelerate across a suspect span and hope momentum carried them through. A D8 moved slowly, deliberately, and with enough mass to punish any mistake. If ice failed under one of them, recovery in breakup conditions would be nearly impossible. The machine could go through, the sled behind it could jackknife, and the operator might have only seconds to get clear. On stable winter ice, a crawler tractor was one of the safest machines in the country. On rotten spring river ice, it became a steel anchor. Crews began facing decisions that operators in remote country know too well. Move now and risk losing the machine in transit, or wait and risk losing the route entirely. There is no clean choice once the season tips. Every hour spent checking the road is an hour the road keeps changing. Every attempt to improve a weak section costs time, labor, and more traffic on ice that is already under stress. And the worst part was this: the same weight that made the D8 useful also limited the number of options left. Somewhere along that line, the margin disappeared. The Kuskokwim was breaking early, and 11 Caterpillar D8s were still on the wrong side of the river. In Alaska in 1957, that was not just a transportation problem, it was an operational emergency measured in steel, current, and thaw. Part 2 would begin when the crews had to decide whether to force a return across failing ice, hold the machines in place, or accept that the river had already taken them out of the season. Back on the Kuskokwim, the crews were running out of river. By the time the danger was fully understood, the return route was already breaking apart in sections. Shore leads had opened first, narrow bands of dark water between the bank and the main sheet, then pressure cracks began to travel across the haul road itself. What had been a winter road was becoming a chain of separated platforms, each one still carrying snow on top, each one weaker underneath. The D8s were no longer simply delayed, they were being cut off. The first instinct in a situation like that is always to move. A machine in motion feels salvageable. A machine left behind feels lost. But on the Kuskokwim, movement had become the hazard. A Caterpillar D8 could spread its load across broad tracks, yes, but it still brought tens of thousands of pounds onto ice that was no longer acting as a single structural surface. The terrain was doing exactly what the operators feared. It was turning from support into deception. There were attempts to read a path back. Crews checked known crossings, inspected the approaches, and watched the current work at weak points under the sheet. In colder weeks, that kind of field judgment was enough. Not now. Rotten spring ice can look solid from a distance because the snow cover stays in place after the strength is already gone. A route that held the day before can fail under the first loaded pass of the next morning. The machine was fighting physics, not just distance, so the decision changed. The problem was no longer transport, it was preservation. The D8s were pulled off the most exposed sections and staged where the ice or adjacent ground still offered temporary stability. Fuel, batteries, and vulnerable components would have been the first concern. In remote Alaska, no crew walks away from heavy iron casually. If abandonment becomes necessary, it is usually controlled abandonment. Fluids are checked. Openings are secured. Parts that can be stripped without crippling future recovery are removed or protected. The goal is simple. Leave the machine in the best condition possible for a return that may not come soon. That was the logic now. Not how to finish the winter haul. How to keep 11 tractors from being destroyed by breakup, shifting ice or floodwater once the river fully opened. This is the part of the story that matters most, because it explains why the machines were trapped but not immediately lost. The Kuskokwim did not swallow all 11 D8s in one dramatic moment. It did something more difficult for operators and owners to accept. It forced them into suspension. The tractors remained in place while the season changed around them. Day by day, the river made recovery less practical. Then it made it impossible. Once breakup advanced, any hope of crossing with the machines was gone. Floating ice could strike the tracks or blade. Margins could collapse under approach weight. Slough channels that had been frozen flat in winter widened into moving water. Even if one tractor could somehow be coaxed across a marginal section, 11 could not safely, not in sequence, not with current working beneath every decision. Then the margin disappeared completely. The crews had to leave them. 11 Caterpillar D8s, among the most valuable machines in that field system, were stranded beyond the usable ice route because spring reached the Kuskokwim before the operation was finished. That is the consequence, plain and simple. No dramatic mechanical failure, no engine defect, no operator panic, just time, thaw, and a river that no longer intended to carry steel. To understand why that outcome was so costly, consider what a D8 represented in Alaska in the 1950s. This was not easily replaced equipment sitting near a dealership yard. Getting a heavy crawler into remote western Alaska meant procurement, shipping, barge coordination, fuel planning, mechanics, and months of logistical effort. Every one of those tractors was a freight problem before it ever became a working machine. Losing access to 11 at once was not just a line item, it was an operational blow. And yet the decision to leave them was still the correct one. That is the hard truth in machine history. Sometimes the right decision is the one that looks most like defeat. Once breakup had advanced past a certain point, forcing a crossing would only have traded stranded iron for drowned operators and destroyed equipment. A D8 that sits through a season can sometimes be recovered. A D8 that breaks through moving river ice in spring is usually gone for good. The reason matters. Ice failure under static winter conditions is one problem. Ice failure during breakup is another entirely. In breakup, the river is not only unsupported, it is active. It tears, lifts, rotates, and carries. So the machines stayed where they were while the Kuskokwim opened fully around them. By late spring, the winter road had ceased to exist. The route that had once supported freight trains of steel and fuel was now open water, broken pans, and unstable margins. From the air or from a bluff above the river, the trapped tractors would have looked almost unreal, heavy crawlers sitting motionless beyond a transportation system that had vanished in a matter of days. That image is the whole story in one frame. Machines built to move Earth stopped cold by a calendar they could not negotiate with. What happened after that was quieter, but no less important. With the river open, attention shifted from immediate recovery to seasonal planning. Could the tractors be reached by barge later? Could temporary roads be cut from other approaches once the ground dried? Could some units be serviced in place and brought out in stages the following winter after freeze-up returned? Those were the practical questions. In remote operations, Abandonment is often temporary, in theory, even when it becomes long-term. In fact, some machines likely did come back into service later through staged recovery, repositioning, or delayed haul once winter returned. Others may have remained where they were longer than anyone intended, exposed to weather, floodplain moisture, and the slow attrition that begins the moment regular maintenance stops. That uncertainty is part of why stories like this fade. There is rarely one clean ending. There is the crisis, the decision, and then a long logistical afterlife, scattered across reports, memories, and equipment records. But the central event remains clear. In 1957, early breakup on the Kuskokwim trapped 11 Caterpillar D8s beyond the return route and forced crews to abandon the movement before the river took more than steel. Mechanically, the lesson is straightforward. On paper, a heavy crawler seems ideal for winter route work because tracks lower ground pressure and traction stays consistent on snow and hard ice. On the ground, spring breakup reverses that advantage. The same weight that gives a D8 authority in winter makes it intolerant of weakening support. When the ice begins to rot from below, low ground pressure does not save a 30-ton machine. It only delays the moment of failure. And in remote river systems, delay is often all you get. Operationally, the lesson is even sharper. The machine entered the crisis long before the crisis became visible. The real mistake, if there was one, was not a dramatic last-minute decision on rotten ice. It was allowing the schedule to lean too far into the closing edge of the season. That happens in every frontier job. One more load, one more trip, one more week before thaw. Most years, crews get away with it. Then one year they do not. The site is quiet now. The winter road is gone each summer as completely as if it never existed, and the river returns to what it always was beneath the ice road mythology, moving water with its own timetable. But for one season in 1957, that timetable overruled men, machines, and plans at once. The D8s were not beaten by lack of power. They were beaten by seasonality, current, and the false confidence that frozen infrastructure always creates. What failed first was not the engine, but the route itself. That is why this story still matters. If you know ice roads, remote hauling, or spring breakup work, you understand how narrow that margin can be. And if you want more machine histories told at ground level, where steel, weather, and decision-making meet, stay with this archive. Because the Kuskokwim was not the last American route to strand heavy equipment when winter let go.